Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Dedicated to the Craft, a podcast brought to you by Ballast Point Brewing Company. I'm your host, Jeff Lozano, and today we are talking all things beer geeky. We have Matt and Adam from our quality team laying it down, throwing big, complicated words at us, expensive equipment that we'll never be able to afford. And we just kind of get down in the nitty gritty about what it is to deconstruct a beer. In fact, Adam, at the end of the show, actually deconstructs a beer, or Passing Haze. And it's really cool just to see him, listen to him break down all the different components of experiencing and enjoying a beer. And then Matt hits us with off flavors that everybody should know, especially if you're an avid craft beer drinker. Some very common flavors and off flavors that you should just be paying attention to. But before we get to the episode, let me remind everybody that Ballast Point is the official craft beer of the San Diego Padres. And every Friday, you should be celebrating it by putting on your brown and gold, any San Diego gear that you have, cracking open a Ballast Point beer, maybe a Swinging Friar Ale, and rooting our boys on to an awesome team, to an awesome season. Let's get after it. Without further ado, Adam and Matt from our quality team. Cheers. I have the Skylab on this episode. And is that a thing? Did I make that up? I'm not sure if I made it up. It's Skylab, right?
It is Skylab.
Okay,
yes.
Skylab. What the dopest spot in the brewery. Everybody thinks that the brew house is cool or the tasting room is fun, but no, the Skylab is where it's at. You two gentlemen are bringing all things quality and sensory into the game, and we're going to talk about it. But before we do, we need to wet our whistles with something, right? So why don't we crack open a nice little beer?
Right. Into the camera.
Ow! I love it. I love it. Cheers, you guys. Welcome to the show.
Cheers.
I'm happy to talk to you guys. All right, so we have Matt Gallegher, Gallagher's Best. Matt, raise your hand, please.
I'll just gotta raise the
Here we go. Happy belated birthday, by the way, and happy early birthday.
Happy early birthday. Happy belated.
And then we have Adam Minjares. Did I say that right? Adam Minjares.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah. I'm never sure about how to pronounce Mexican names. It's like it's Lopez. It's Lopez, or there's an accent somewhere. But Minjares. Guys.
I like the way you say it.
Yeah. So you guys are in the Skylab, and before we even talk about what the Skylab consists of and all that stuff, I wanted to ask a little bit more of a detailed run day by day from each of you guys. So Matt, you're in the Skylab with Adam, but what do you do in the Skylab?
Yes. So in the Skylab, or just in Ballast Point, I am a quality analyst. So I've been with Ballast Point for just over 8 years now. And during that time, I've kind of done a little bit of everything. And the most recent iteration of my job, career, daily life involves basically two components of the essentially 5 components that comprise our quality program. And that would be the packaging quality and the analytics. So essentially what that means is at the end of our brewing cycle, if you will, like after the beer's been fermented and finished and put into bright tanks and it's ready for packaging. For pounding, yeah. I mean, if you want to go from the bright tanks, you can pound it from there.
Jump to them.
But like we want to make sure that it's we're presenting it in the best way, and so that's going to be making sure that when we put it into packaging, so bottles or cans, as well as in kegs, that the beer is being preserved in the most pristine state. And so what that really means is we want things like oxygen, which, while good for the yeast at the beginning of fermentation, it's harmful for the beer in package. So we want to minimize that. And so really it's just making sure that it's low. And so we have some really nice instruments, some good oxygen sensors. And alongside that, we also want to make sure that CO2 is in the right range. So that's more of a Goldilocks situation where it's like, you don't want it too low, but you also don't want it too high, so you want
style dependent too, right?
Style dependent. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something where it's like, you don't want it too high unless you're drinking soda. And if you don't want it too low, unless it's one of those beers where it's like, you don't really necessarily want that type of effervescence.
This is I'm drinking Longfin right now, and I just cracked this can, and the carbonation is top notch, Matt. Good job.
And yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm very, very happy with how our gases come out. So we're good there. We've got top notch gases. But they also look at other things too. Fill level is another one. So it's not the sexiest thing you think of when you think of packaging, but it's really important because it's one of those things where it's like if you buy a 6-pack or if you buy like whatever packaging, like you want to make sure that you're getting your full value, and so that's a big part of it. Is we have pretty good limits, very tight limits on how much leeway there is either side of that. So like in a bottle or a can, a 12-ounce bottle or a 12-ounce can, which is coming to about 355 milliliters, we only give it so much up or down before we say like, hey, like this we're just not filling these correctly, and we've got to make adjustments. So those are the three. Yeah, those are the main elements of the packaging side. And then on the analytics side, this is where we get into things like alcohol content, we get into bitterness, we get into color, we get into other like kind of auxiliary metrics, things like pH, specific gravity, and those types of things. But the main ones that we're really looking at are going to be something like alcohol content, in part because this is regulated by the government, and they want their chunk of change for what you're doing, and so
those
they want
animals.
Yeah,
they want everything. They want it all.
It's good though. I mean, like if you kind of look into the history of why they regulate it, there were some shady characters in the history of alcohol, and they want to make sure that people are not getting fleeced, that they are getting what they pay for. And so, and I mean, there's the flavor element of beer, but there's also the functional alcohol component of beer. And so that's really important that we maintain that element of quality. And so we're very diligent about measuring alcohol content. And even though like our focus in general in Skylab is towards the end product, we are actually measuring alcohol during fermentation. So it's actually kind of a component of the other steps in the process to make sure that we're going to get to that level that we want for that brand.
Nice. Well, you're always walking around with vials. That's all I see you. You always have vials, and you're taking vials from one place to another place, and you always have vials. And that's actually really cool that you were able to bring that up for everybody listening, because I don't think that, like you said, it's not the sexiest topic as far as beer in the beer world to talk about.
Depends on who you ask. Depends on who you ask.
Right. But the thing is, what you're really going out to get is bang for your buck, and you don't want a low fill, man. Real quick, just so that everybody that might be curious knows the answer. In a bottle, you can pretty much see if you have enough or not enough. But in a can, how do we do that? How do you know how much is in that can and if it's enough?
So there are a few different ways of measuring that. So like we do have sensors in place that will actually measure every can as it's running along the line. But then we'll also go through and validate that. So what we'll do is I'll take a sample set from each run, and we'll measure it. And so you can do it a couple different ways. And one of them is just by measuring the mass. So it's like we know how much the can weighs, we know how much the lid weighs. And we could figure out the liquid mass. We measure density on all of the beers, and so it's just a simple calculation to go from mass to volume, just based off the density. The other way to do it, there's we have an instrument from Hatch, the Orbisphere, the 6110, and this one as part of it's a
good model.
So this actually is a sexy part.
Sexy
it's like
top,
the big sexy instrument. This thing will actually measure oxygen content, CO2 content, fill volumes, pressure, nitrogen. You can do all sorts of different calculations. And actually, the cool thing, actually going back to oxygen for a second, is that it actually will give you the different components. So when we're troubleshooting, let's say we do see high oxygen, we want to know where is it coming from? Where is it being introduced? And this actually gives you two different readings on it. So it'll give you something called dissolved oxygen, which is going to be the oxygen component that's already in the beer. And then it'll give you total, which is going to be the dissolved oxygen plus the headspace oxygen. So in every can, there's going to be, a small amount of air. Hopefully it's mostly carbon dioxide, not a lot of oxygen. But if there is, then that over time is going to dissolve into the beer and ultimately ruin it. So we want to make sure that it's all as low as possible. And so if it is in the headspace, that's a very different situation than if it's already in the beer.
So cool.
Yeah, like actually even just recently we were able to kind of troubleshoot with that. So there's a step between like the filler and the seamer. So after the beer goes into the can, but before the lid is kind of fully attached to the body, there's a segment where you kind of blow off any oxygen or air that's just present as you're making that transfer. And we had to turn that up a little bit because it just wasn't quite there. And so we were able to get that in real time before it caused any harm to the run. Yeah. So it's that comes from, help with everyone from the packaging team. The guys in the canning line are incredible. They're very diligent about working with us and helping us get the samples, and we'll bounce ideas off them, trying to figure out exactly where it is. Cause it's definitely like, there's an art to the science here where it's like, trying to interpret results and give them feedback.
Right. Well, speaking about interpreting results, Adam, this is where you come in, and you have a very important role in the company too. Tell us what you do.
Well, we kind of touched on it already. I just pound beer from bright tanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, hey, look, that's going to look really good on the resume.
No. So I am our sensory analyst. I started back as a tech at Scripps with Matt. So Matt and I have a long tenure together. And back then we did have a bit more overlap with some of the lab instruments, but these days Matt has definitely taken the reins on packaging and analytics and just run with them. After hearing everything you just said just now, Matt, I just have to compliment you on how well you do all of the things you just said. That was no blowing smoke. This guy really crushes it.
Thank you.
I know, you could tell. It's passionate. We're all passionate, but you're passionate too, dude. So tell us.
Yeah.
Sensory.
Yeah. So I think I kind of I caught the attention of the right people because I just love to talk about beer. I love to talk about the flavors. I love to get the conversation going. And so with that, we used to do a weekly meeting where we would kind of taste what we called our core beers and just keep ourselves aligned with what we expect our beers to taste like, right? It's important that if we're going to be approving these things, that we know what we're looking for. So Sculpin, for example, which we've made many batches of, we have a very good grasp of what that tastes like. And it's important that people keep that practice up. So having a weekly meeting like that was really useful for that. And I think that maybe I just love that time of day when it says, hey, meeting on the books, crack open a Sculpin. And I'm like, all right, I'm ready to thrive. I just kind of fell into it, I think. So now I'm our sensory analyst. And with that, I get to utilize the palates of our team, our wonderful team, everybody from our brewers to our quality team throughout the brewery. It's just awesome. And we get the input of everybody on those beers like Sculpin or also developing brands. So, and that is also throughout fermentation, like Matt's described, where he's already watching ABV from the very beginning. We start watching flavor from the very beginning as well. You can kind of start to get a sense if something's going awry early. And in those cases, we can get ahead of the problem as soon as we can. But it's also one of those types of roles where no news is good news, right? We know what we're looking for and things are showing up like we expect, then let the yeast do their thing, right?
What's something really quick that it's may or may not be typical to catch early on, or something that you've caught early on and able to rectify later, just so anyone listening is like, oh, like what kind of things do you catch? Like what's a typical one?
Well, I mean, there are obvious ones, like we'll watch diacetyl production or vicinal diketones, VDKs, in every single beer, right? And we have a prediction of when about they should be leveled off to a point and depleted that you won't be tasting them in the future beer. But if we ever start to see that trend isn't really leaning the direction we want it to go, or at least keeping up with the pace we expect, our fermentation team, and shout out to Michaela and Emily and everybody that works on the team, they tend to recognize those trends very early. And we know that those are going to have flavor impacts, so they merit doing something about the beer very early. And that could originate for a lot of different reasons. It could be that the yeast generation is, we know how many generations we'd like to use. And when you get to the higher end, it might be that every now and then that yeast is just a little bit less happy than the one before. We've got to remember these are living organisms that make these beer for us. They're part of the team too.
Yeah.
And every now and then we just notice a trend that's a little bit wonky. And we can get ahead of it right away.
Very cool. And so now you've assembled a sensory team, right, at this point. And what kind of strategy goes into assembling a team? I think most people don't know that there's a strategy to assemble a team.
Oh, I'm flattered you think so. I mean, we went a pretty fun route, I hope, at Ballast. I offered a couple of 10-week courses where it's pretty much, if you're into this and you're willing to commit and you want to show up,
twist our arm, you got to drink beer.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that meeting invite on your calendar, and it's gonna be, hey, come crack a beer with me. Of course, I've got to encourage that conversation and get that ball rolling for everybody, and it's a great opportunity for everybody to just kind of express their personal perception of the beer. Because that's one thing that I've got to point out about sensory is that everybody does have their own personal perception. I mean, that's why when you go to a buffet or something, not everybody is at the exact same spot in the buffet. Some people like the saltier, some people like the sweeter. I hope everybody likes the pizza. If they don't, then get out of my buffet. But everybody's got a personal perception of things. And it's only when you get together in a room and really start talking about these things that you can start to understand how maybe your own palate is a little bit more sensitive to one thing or another, or how about even your preferences, how you're drawn to one beer versus another. And so getting people together in a repeated situation like that, starting those conversations, and also giving them exposure to some of the stuff that we might want to look out for. So like that diacetyl or something else like acetaldehyde, which is, if we pick that up in flavor, that's a major problem. That's a red flag. That's a stop. We need to make an action right away type off flavor. We can get into that more if we want to, but giving people that exposure, that stimuli, and that repeated practice with, it sounds a bit simple, but I'm just going to throw out an example. If I hold an orange in front of your nose and maybe squeeze the rind a little bit, you know that there's an orange in front of you, but that's because you've had a lot of practice with that. And on top of that, that is a linking between different parts of your brain, everywhere from your little nose to your big brain up there, that's saying that is an orange. So when I ask you, what does a guava smell like? Or what does a passion fruit smell like? Some people with a lot of exposure to that could quickly pull that up and they know exactly what I'm trying to reference. But if you don't have that exposure, you need it, and you just need practice. We can all do it. And getting together with a team like that is a great opportunity to provide stimuli like that, whether it's good flavors or even off flavors.
That's a really good point. And so when you set up these tastings, because there's also a little art to that, what are we doing? So if anybody at home wants to download a little tasting sheet and they want to sit down and they want to start training themselves to drink beer and to analyze it, describe a good setting for that.
Good setting. Well, get yourself something quiet.
Ooh. Are we listening to something like Barry Manilow or something? Are we listening to something?
No, actually, you got to turn off the stereo. You got to turn off that kettle decaf, man. It's got to be quiet.
Okay.
But give yourself somewhere where you can concentrate, and not a lot of outside stimuli. Don't do it next to the fryer. Don't do it next to cooking food in the kitchen, and yeah. Just give yourself not a lot of outside sensory stimuli so that you really can focus on what's in front of you. Because the truth is, when you're observing a beer, you could argue that maybe you don't use your ears, but you use your eyes, right? You use your nose, you use your tongue, right? You even use, like the physical properties of the beer, like the effervescence that we talked about, that carbonation level, the body, the viscosity, the weight on the tongue. You're using all of your senses to assess this beer. And I mean, maybe you can listen to it and see if it talks to you. Maybe some of them will. Beer speaks.
Well, we cracked it. We cracked that beer, and that was a very pleasant sound.
Yeah. I love the idea. Here.
Oh yeah. Okay. Let's see.
You hear that? That's how you know the beer's good.
Okay. And so what else? Okay, what we're doing? We're sitting down. We've set the tone. We're paying attention. Anything else that we need by our side or to mute or enhance?
I don't know that you need much more than yourself, to be frank.
I see a lot of crackers. I always see a lot of crackers in the Skylab near the.
I see what you're getting at. Okay.
I'm prying.
You are. Okay. All right. So say you're at the perfume shop too, right? You ever see the coffee beans sitting around? I know you spend a lot of time in perfume shops.
I don't, surprisingly.
No.
For how good I smell.
I just assumed. So they'll have coffee beans around, right? And we've all got forearms, and this is going to sound weird, but what you need sometimes is sort of a palate cleanser, and that's what those crackers are that you mentioned. Just something to kind of give you a neutral, not overwhelming in any way necessarily, but at least it takes you away from what you're currently smelling, because our body has this incredible ability to get used to what's around us. That's why maybe if you might not notice how beautifully perfumed you are all the time, I do when you walk in the room, and I'm like,
Adam,
that
thank
smells
you.
like Chef Lozano. Yeah.
Thank you. You've never complimented me like that, so this is a nice opportunity to say how nice I smell. All right.
He remembers your birthday every year, though.
He does. That's okay. All right. And so, yeah, okay, that's a good point. You acclimate, and I think we've all had an experience like that where something's cooking in the kitchen. You walk in to see what it is, and it's great. But then that it kind of gets homogenized with everything else, and it kind of just loses its luster.
It's kind of a safety mechanism. And if your brain can tell that something's not really hurting you, it knows it doesn't need to pay super close attention to it. And so it can kind of start to tune it out. And so, yeah, those palate cleansers, those kind of neutral things, or something that's even just a stimuli to kind of jolt your system a little bit, like a coffee bean is kind of a jolt. Or the forearm. I know this is going to sound weird, but for all those wonderful people out there listening, just smell your forearm. This is going to sound weird, but just smell your forearm. And if you haven't been smelling your forearm for the past 30 minutes, you're going to be like, oh, I guess that's what I smell like. That's so weird. I mean, somebody else would notice, but you never would because you're always around it. And that same thing can happen with other sensory stimuli. So it's good to have a little jolt every here and there.
Well, that's very interesting, man. I think that that's a very important facet that we as a company are paying attention to, right? We're setting up all the tools. We're making all the adjustments for a phenomenal packaged finished product, which is what everyone's going to be enjoying in the comfort of their own home, at a bar, at a restaurant, in our tasting room. We want a beautiful representation of what the brewers are working so hard to create. And Matt, you're walking around, you're getting all of these samples, all these vials. You're making sure that the DO is low. You're making sure that everything is in spec. And essentially, what you're doing is you're kind of painting or recreating a fingerprint of each of our beers, right?
Definitely, yeah. And we've done these types of fingerprints in lots of different settings. Like what we're doing, I think with analytics. So on top of the DOs, the things that we're measuring in package, we're also looking at some of the things like the bitterness. So we will measure something called IBUs, which is the International Bitterness Unit. It's essentially we're just looking for compounds that are absorbing in a certain range of the electromagnetic spectrum that are typically associated with being bitter. And so this is going to be His
conversations are way sexier than mine. Listen to this guy.
My God, yeah, it got really, really complicated all of a sudden.
Yeah,
not just kidding.
I mean, and you'll see this at breweries, tasting rooms, and things like that. Like alongside the beer, it'll say like IBUs, and then it'll give you a number. And so generally, it's useful in terms of just kind of giving yourself a general sense of where do you expect the bitterness to be. So there's no real hard limit to the upper number, but there are some soft limits in terms of really trying to get IBUs above 100 is difficult to say the least. Like you do see kind of a dropping off or just diminished returns as you increase your hopping rates. But generally, I like to think of it as kind of like a 100-point scale. And you can kind of divide it up there. And so Sculpin is going to be towards the higher end. So, we're looking at around 70 IBUs on something like Sculpin. But then with the Wegus or the Longfin, we're talking 30 or 20 IBUs respectively. So those are going to be towards the lower end. And that's something that we look at to stay consistent, just as a basic taste flavor component. And that's another big part of what Adam is recording as well. So there's actually quite a bit of overlap in what we do. It's just we kind of approach it or interpret it in different ways. And I think that's the really cool thing is that where we can take some of these numbers or measurements and then kind of look for trends, but then we can also look for other types of just general hedonic responses, or just how much are you enjoying it? Does it fit with the style? Does it fit with the other flavors that are there? And so it's been wonderful. I mean, the past year has been difficult because we don't get to hang out as much, at least in the lab, Adam and I. But we still do communicate quite a bit, and so because there is so much there, and so it's or another example would be with the packaging. Even though I'm measuring the DOs, it does have a huge amount of relevance when it comes to flavor and that aspect of sensory. So it's how is that affecting the aging component? And I know Adam's stability, shelf stability, and shelf life, and that's a huge part of what Adam's contributing, and it's a daunting task. So Adam has my admiration and respect for diving into that whole realm.
It is.
He's being nice. He's still the one tasting them for me, though. So it's really a pleasure.
Oh, stop it, you two. You guys are both doing the Lord's work. Real quick, Adam. Matt, before we jump into something a little bit funner, in your Skylab, what is the coolest machine that you have and why?
Oh man.
Concisely. Is it because, and if it's just because it's expensive, that's cool too.
Yeah, I mean, they're all on the more expensive side. I'm gonna go with the alkalizer because it tells you like how drunk you're gonna get. Like I mean that's kind of cool, right? It'll calculate certain things. Like it'll give you estimated calories, like when you're drinking. So how many calories you're going to consume in a 12-ounce pour. And we'll get pH, we'll get color, we can get like the density from it. So we can calculate all sorts of other things. So you get a sense of like how good the fermentation was. You get a sense of, like roughly like what kind of dryness you might expect from the finished product. So just in terms of like just the raw amount of information, I really like that device.
Okay.
It's tough, but the Orbisphere is also really cool. Being able to know like
it has a cool name.
It does. I mean, anytime you start just combining orb and sphere, and it's just you're in for a good time. But that one's really cool from being able to also do stuff in real time to troubleshoot to make sure that the beer is going to be good, that it's going to stay fresh and enjoyable. So like, I mean, it's like trying to choose your favorite child. Like now they're children that can detect alcohol and oxygen. So like, so much cooler than real children, right?
Yeah, right. And one of the things too is that once we're in mass distribution and we're in different places and in different bars and stuff like that, all of that stuff pays itself out in dividends. All that attention to DO levels and stuff like that, because we are creating an organic product. It is something that is living. It's something that's going to naturally degrade with exposure to various elements and stuff like that. So we're doing this for you people. We want you to drink our beer the way it was intended to, coming as close to right off the bright tank as possible. And that's where the whole quality team comes into play. Everybody on the sensory team comes into play as a nice structured way of early detection and stuff like that. But for right now, I'm going to hit you, Matt. I'm going to hit you with a few off flavors, and I'm going to see if you can tell everybody what those off flavors are. You ready?
Okay.
No. They're not that bad, dude. No, this is just a natural, informative thing made fun. All right, so I'm going to hit you with the first one. This one should be easy. Acetaldehyde. What does that taste like or smell like?
So depending on like the concentration, you can get it in a couple different flavors. So like as it's starting out at the low end, that might be kind of a green apple flavor.
Oh, there you go.
And then as it increases, you can actually start getting more of like a pumpkin rind kind of flavor out of it. You would think so, but really it's not. It's not that good. And it's also something your body doesn't really like it either. It's something that if that builds up, you might end up with a bit of a headache.
Okay, all right. Next,
you get a bit of astringency on the tongue too. I mean, that one's it's unpleasant all around.
It's unpleasant.
That's why I call
green apple.
That guy the red flag.
Yeah.
The red flag. You did say that. Ethyl acetate.
So that's a solvent character that you get with production of more of the like the higher alcohols as well. So like that one's going to have it's going to be reminiscent of something like nail polish remover.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Isoamyl acetate.
So that is the wonderful flavor of banana.
Ooh, that's nice.
But like, I mean, that one's not always an off flavor though. So that one can be intentional. If you are finding that in something where you weren't intending it, then it can definitely be cause for concern.
That's a good answer.
But if you're using some of like the European strains, if you're using like a Belgian wit strain, it's definitely going to be expected. I mean, if you're getting too much of it, you might be stressing out the yeast a little bit too much. But you could definitely get a little bit of that from some beers.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool. And so I think that there's a few more here and there, but those three, being able to identify those three, sometimes off flavors, sometimes not, depending on their potency, I guess. It's nice for an avid home brewer or beginning home brewer to be able to identify in the beer as what could be identified as off flavors, right? So as a consumer, we need to know some of these because they're not necessarily intended, and it might be a nice little conversation to have with the cellar man or the brewer. It's like, hey, what do you think of my beer? It's like, hey, look, it's good and everything, but I am getting a little bit of this acetaldehyde, or I'm getting a little bit of isoamyl acetate. And the easier way of describing it may be banana, green apple, or more like a solvent, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So I like that. Adam, what's up?
Well, I was going to say, if I can jump in, I mean, if anybody wants practice with these things, you don't always need access to the chemical itself. You can use, I mean, these common descriptors are used for these flavors, off flavors, because they're quite accurate, and they're going to be some of the things that are present in these words that we're describing as well. So the nail polish, the banana, the crisp apple, or even like a freshly carved pumpkin. These are good descriptors because they are accurate places that you'll find these chemicals. So if you want exposure to that, just get out there and carve yourself a pumpkin. It doesn't matter what time of the year it is, just carve a pumpkin.
Right. Actually, and it's not just the off flavors, the on flavors as well. So it's the, like when you're smelling things like in hops, so there's the geraniol component in hops that gives it that floral element. And it's the same compound that you get out of roses. So if you want to smell like a flowery hop, go to your local florist, go smell some, stop and smell the roses. And
I was hoping you were going to go there.
Of course. How would I leave that on the ground? Come on, you got to pick that up. But go through the produce section and just pay attention. I mean, maybe don't leave your mask on for now. Don't go
touching all the melons. Don't go touching all the melons.
Right. Yeah. But pay attention. And really that's kind of what we do. Like the main component of our job is not necessarily just the instruments, but it's paying attention. Like it's kind of living the examined beer life. So it's
that's awesome. That's awesome. Very philosophical.
So the point is, like, everyone could be a scientist. Like everyone can be like do what we do. Like, I mean, the difficult part is just making sure the machines stay happy. But really, like when it comes to tasting, it really is about being like present in the moment, like thinking about what you're tasting, thinking about like what you're doing, and
and that's a really good way of looking at it. So everybody listening, come take our jobs. Anybody could do it. Just pay attention. Just pay attention. And dude, it's one of the most important aspects here in the brewery. And before we're running short on time, but before we stop this conversation, I want to have a little bit of fun with some tasting. So Adam, why don't you deconstruct a beer with us really quick? I think that would be cool for the listeners to understand real quick what it's like to just kind of analyze a beer.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, I've got a Passing Haze in front of me. This is one of my go-tos.
Passing Haze.
Absolutely.
Let's deconstruct it. I'll start it with the audible.
Now you see me. Now you don't. All right.
Oh,
there it is.
Yeah,
right.
I know.
So now we've used our ears, right? We've used our ears like we talked about. I really enjoy this beer because I find it very approachable. It offers a lot of flavor. It offers a lot of aromas and not an overwhelming basic taste experience, but that's kind of what I like about it. And me personally, it's also a little bit lighter on ABV. If I'm being honest, I like to drink a bunch of beers, and if they're too strong, then, well, I'm a little bit SOL. Yeah. Or at least the podcast goes way worse. This
way
one
better in my experience.
This one's right where I like it. This one's 4.2% ABV. So for me, that's a bit below any kind of alcohol perception, but you still get to have the fun of having a beer. So like I mentioned, I mean, we use all of our senses assessing a beer. I'm holding this guy up. If anybody's watching our video, you can see it's got this beautiful haze, this beautiful kind of straw yellow, almost goldish color, but on the lighter side. And already your eyes are soaking it in, right? They're soaking it in. Jeff, I love the head retention on that pour you just gave.
I like it too, man.
Yeah, I poured mine a moment ago. Looks beautiful in that tulip glass, by the way. So your eyes are soaking it in, right? What's next? You start bringing it closer to your face. Your nose is going to start accepting that thing. What I really enjoy about this beer is, speaking of the geraniol or any of the other elements from around the world around us, is I can get some awesome, soft, kind of floral lavender notes out of this beer. And you do hear lavender every now and then as a descriptor in beer. And my personal perception is that I don't always get it, but I do love that lavender element in this Passing Haze beer.
Yeah. Yep.
Along with that, you hear tropical a lot, right? And I love kind of the guava element of this beer. Guava skins and guava. If you have guavas in the room, you know the guavas are in the room. They're so pungent, but in like kind of a fun tropical stank kind of way. You get a bit of that in this beer as well. Of course, you've got the wheat element kind of rounding it out on the bottom, but you've still also got kind of a spritz of a lemony citrus. And it really, truly, I mean, if you just take a moment and take your time.
Oh my God, you're describing it so good, dude.
Oh, it's a good beer, man. There's a reason I chose this one. I mean, if you just take a moment and just try to recall those things, like I said, when you're used to having an orange in front of your nose, you know orange right away. But now just take a moment, try to remember the last time you had a guava. And if you haven't had a guava recently, go get a guava. Similar for a lemon, or just make some wheat bread at home. It's quarantine. We've all been making bread. Make some wheat bread, right? Yeah. And then you can start to pull those aromas out of this beer, and it really just opens up the experience. You know, you just really start getting the round experience of flavors. And tasting it as well.
There you go. I was waiting for that stop.
There's that audible confirmation again. One of the things that's so interesting about this beer is we actually don't add hops hopside. So those all come later. And so you get a much softer bitterness, a much more mellow bitterness. And it's still there. And it's down around, we were talking earlier, the 20 range or so. It's still around there, right? But it's much softer experience. So you've got that really sessionable beer right in front of you, full of flavor, full of aroma, full of visual stimuli. It's all there, but it goes down so easy. You can even have a couple of them, and you're just doing great still.
Ooh.
I'll tell you, man, when it's time for a shifty, Passing Haze is high on my list. Until Calico's back on the menu, that baby's going to be maybe even
Adam, that was a perfect deconstructing of this beer. It's so good that we should do this for a few of our beers, and we'll talk later about how we can incorporate you guys onto the show again. So we can have some like beer breakdown segments and episodes and stuff. Anyways, that was a perfect way of identifying it.
Schedule that meeting. I'll be there.
The meeting is drinking beer, so you guys will be early. So hey, listen, guys. So in a barley husk or whatever, you guys are in charge of making sure, or helping the team make sure, that when our beers are served and enjoyed, that they're as close to fresh as possible and right on the money when it comes to what we intended you to be drinking. So I applaud you. I'm sure everybody that loves our brand applauds you, because a lot of hard work goes into making this not only good, but tastes good consistently time and time again. So thank you guys for jumping on the show.
It's a team effort. It's everybody.
Oh, yeah. 300 touch points, people. Don't forget it.
That's right. With gloves.
With gloves. And we don't look at things directly. We're not allowed to make eye contact around the brewery yet. So hey, guys, raise a glass. Give me a little cheers. And thank you so much for what you do. And thank you so much for being on the show.
All right.
Cheers.
Salud.
Salud.